My parents canceled my 25th birthday for my older brother's fake meltdown, so I walked out with my suit still on. I left them standing in the hallway, completely unaware that their lies, their secret loans, and their entirely fabricated perfect life were about to collapse in a matter of weeks. They thought they had all the power. They thought I would just put my head down and take it like I always did. They were wrong. Before I tell you about the explosive ending of the story and how they lost everything, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I stood in front of the tall, oak-framed mirror in my bedroom, carefully adjusting the collar of my crisp white shirt and pulling my dark navy tie tight. I smoothed down the lapels of my tailored suit jacket. It wasn't just any suit. I had worked double shifts for 3 grueling months at an architectural firm as a junior intern just to afford this exact outfit. Turning 25 felt like a massive, life-altering milestone. It was a Friday night. The air outside was crisp, and I had secured a reservation at Magnolia's, the absolute finest and most exclusive steakhouse in the downtown district. My fiancée, Sarah, was meeting me there at 7 sharp. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like the main character in my own story. I wasn't just the quiet, compliant younger brother anymore. I was a man with a real future, holding a steady job, and building a life with a woman I loved. I checked my silver wristwatch. 6:30. It was time to go. I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath to steady my nerves, and walked out of my bedroom. But the moment my foot hit the bottom step of the main wooden staircase, the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of my house hit me like a physical brick wall. The living room lights were turned completely off. The heavy, dark curtains were drawn tightly shut, blocking out the beautiful golden evening sun. The entire house felt like a waiting room for a funeral. And there, sprawled across the expensive leather sofa like a wounded soldier on a battlefield, was my 29-year-old brother, Carter. Let me paint a picture of Carter for you. Carter did not have a job. He hadn't held a steady paycheck in 3 years. He lived rent-free at home, drove a brand-new Porsche, and spent his days going to the gym, playing video games, and complaining to anyone who would listen about how incredibly hard his life was. Right now, his face was buried deep in a decorative throw pillow, and his broad shoulders were shaking with loud, theatrical sobs that echoed through the silent house. My parents, Robert and Brenda, were hovering over him like anxious medics. My mother was gently stroking his hair, whispering soft, comforting nonsense into his ear, while my father patted his back with a look of deep concern. Neither of them was dressed for my birthday dinner. My father was wearing an old, stained college t-shirt, and my mother was literally in her flannel pajamas and fuzzy slippers. My stomach dropped into my shoes. A familiar, sickening feeling of disappointment washed over me. I cleared my throat loudly. Mom? Dad? The reservation is at 7. We need to leave right now if we want to beat the downtown traffic. My mother's head snapped up. Her eyes met mine, and there was absolutely no guilt in her expression. There was no apology for forgetting. There was only cold, calculated annoyance. She stood up quickly, her slippers slapping against the hardwood floor, and marched over to the bottom of the stairs, using her body to physically block my path. Her hand shot out and gripped my wrist hard. "Take off your shoes immediately," she hissed in a harsh, demanding whisper. "Don't make a sound. Look at your brother. Can't you see he is suffering? He had a terrible day, and he needs us." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the absolute absurdity of the situation. Before I could even form a sentence to defend myself, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, loud, intrusive sound that cut through the toxic tension like a knife. Everyone froze. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. The doorbell rang again, longer and much more insistent this time. My father practically lunged for the front door. He frantically smoothed his wrinkled t-shirt, pasted a fake, overly cheerful smile on his face, and cracked the heavy oak door open just a few inches, using his shoulder to block the view of the living room. "David!" My father's voice came out too loud, pitched high with sheer panic. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you tonight. I told you I was coming over this evening to bring Mason a birthday gift, A deep, gravelly voice replied from the porch. It was Uncle David, my father's older brother. David was a highly successful, self-made real estate investor. He had gone through a brutal divorce and a terrible custody battle years ago, which had stripped away his patience and turned him into a man who had absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense or manipulation. Right, of course you did," my father stammered, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the door. "It's just that, well, Mason has severe food poisoning. He's been throwing up upstairs all evening. It's terrible. We had to cancel his whole party. The poor boy is in terrible shape, David. You probably shouldn't come in, it might be contagious." The lie fell from my father's lips so effortlessly, so smoothly, that it chilled me to the bone. They weren't just favoring Carter anymore. They were actively gaslighting everyone around them to protect a 29-year-old toddler throwing a fake tantrum. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. A vein pulsed on my temple. I didn't think. I didn't plan my next move. I just acted. I stepped around my mother, ignoring her sharp gasp, my leather dress shoes clicking sharply and deliberately against the hardwood floor. I walked right up behind my father and pulled the door wide open. The warm porch light illuminated my perfectly pressed suit, my combed hair, and my completely healthy, furious complexion. I stood tall, living, breathing proof of my father's shameless deception. "I'm not sick, Uncle David," I said. My voice echoed in the silent foyer, steady and cold. "Dad is lying." My father's face went from pale white to bright crimson in a fraction of a second. Uncle David pushed past my father effortlessly, stepping fully into the house. David stood in the entryway, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. His piercing gray eyes scanned the dimly lit room. He saw Carter, who had suddenly stopped sobbing and was sitting up, staring like a deer in headlights. He saw my mother, frozen by the staircase. And he saw my father, whose mouth was opening and closing silently. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Robert," Uncle David said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that demanded absolute attention. "You just looked me directly in the eye and lied about your son being violently ill." "David, please, you don't understand the family dynamics here." My mother rushed forward, her voice taking on that sickly sweet, manipulative tone she always used when she was backed into a corner. "Carter is having a mental health crisis. We have to prioritize his emotional needs right now. Mason was just being a little selfish about his dinner." Uncle David didn't even look at her. His gaze remained locked onto my father. "3 weeks ago, Robert, you called my office. You begged me to increase your monthly salary allowance." Uncle David took another step toward my father, towering over him. "You told me you needed an extra $2,000 a month because your accounting firm was failing, and you desperately needed to ensure Mason's college fund was replenished so he wouldn't drown in debt." My father swallowed hard, sweat beads forming on his forehead. "David, I can explain. I have been sending you $6,000 a month for the past 3 years, Uncle David continued, his tone conversational but incredibly deadly. "You looked me in the eye and swore it was to keep a roof over this family's head." Uncle David slowly turned his head to look directly at Carter. Carter quickly tried to puff out his chest, attempting to look intimidating, but he just looked like a panicked child. "So, you're telling me," Uncle David said softly, the silence in the room amplifying his every word, "that I have been paying $6,000 a month to support a 29-year-old unemployed man who threatens a tantrum when his younger brother tries to eat a steak on his 25th birthday? That's not fair, Uncle David," Carter suddenly shouted, his face turning bright red as his fragile ego cracked. "You have millions. You owe this family. And this is my house. So you can get the hell out." The silence that followed Carter's outburst was deafening. Uncle David didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. Instead, a slow, terrifying smile spread across his weathered face. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his smartphone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned the screen around so Carter could see a legal document. "Your house," Uncle David laughed, a harsh, grating sound that held no humor. The county deed says otherwise, Carter. This house is fully registered in my name. It has been since I bailed your father out of bankruptcy 5 years ago. Carter's smug expression vanished instantly. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly pale. And that brand new Porsche Carrera sitting in the driveway? Uncle David continued, his voice getting quieter, forcing everyone to lean in to hear his executioner's tone. The one you rev the engine of every morning to impress the neighbors who actually work for a living? That vehicle is registered to my real estate corporation. It was a company lease I allowed your father to use for his business meetings. Not a toy for a grown man throwing pity parties. I watched my brother's entire reality shatter into a million jagged pieces. He had truly believed he was untouchable. He had believed he was the absolute king of a castle he didn't even own. The keys, Carter? Uncle David demanded, holding out his open, expectant palm. Right now. You can't do this. Carter whined, his voice cracking as he looked at my parents for help. Mom, Dad, tell him he can't. But my father was staring at the floor, completely defeated. My mother was trembling, her hands covering her mouth in shock. With shaking, sweaty hands, Carter dug into his gym shorts pocket and pulled out the heavy Porsche key fob. He slammed it into Uncle David's hand with a pathetic whimper. Uncle David examined the keys for a brief second. Then he turned away from Carter, walked directly over to me, and placed the keys firmly in my palm. Happy 25th birthday, Mason, Uncle David said, his voice instantly warming with genuine affection. I think a Porsche suits a hard-working future architect much better. Drive away from this insane asylum. Immediately, I looked down at the keys resting in my palm. The heavy metal felt cool and solid. Felt like absolute freedom. I looked up at my family. My mother was openly weeping now, real tears streaming down her face as the financial reality of her situation set in. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. His shoulders slumped in total defeat. And Carter was staring at me with a look of such pure, unadulterated hatred that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'll go pack a bag, I said. My voice didn't shake. I didn't wait for permission. I turned my back on them and walked purposefully upstairs to my bedroom. I didn't bother folding my clothes perfectly. I pulled my large canvas duffel bag from the closet and started shoving my shirts, pants, my architectural drafting tools, and my laptop inside. As I zipped the heavy bag shut, the muffled sounds of the commotion downstairs drifted up through the floorboards. David, please, be reasonable. My mother was begging, her voice shrill and dripping with desperation. You can't just take the car. Carter needs it to go to his networking events. And the monthly salary allowance. We have bills. We have a lifestyle to maintain in this neighborhood. You have consequences, Brenda, Uncle David replied flatly, devoid of any sympathy. And you are about to experience every single one of them. The monthly transfers are canceled immediately. I threw my heavy bag over my shoulder, took one last look around the room that had felt like a prison cell for my entire life, and walked back down the stairs. The front door was still wide open. A sleek, black sedan pulled up to the curb. My fiancée, Sarah, stepped out. She was wearing a stunning black dress, her hair perfectly styled for our celebration dinner. She took one analytical look at the chaotic scene on the porch. My mother crying hysterically, my father pleading with his hands clasped, Uncle David standing like an immovable stone statue, and immediately understood the assignment. Sarah was in her final year of law school. She had a razor-sharp mind and an incredible intuition for disaster. She walked quickly up the driveway, completely ignoring my parents as if they were invisible, and took the heavy duffel bag from my shoulder. Are we leaving? She asked me softly, her eyes locked on mine. We are, I replied firmly. I walked past my parents without uttering a single word. They didn't try to stop me. They didn't apologize for ruining my birthday. They were far too busy begging my wealthy uncle to keep funding their comfortable delusions. But as I reached the sleek Porsche, hit the unlock button, and heard the satisfying electronic chirp, I glanced back at the large front bay window of the house. Carter was standing behind the glass. He wasn't crying anymore. The fake, pathetic tantrum had completely evaporated from his face. Instead, the corner of his mouth was curled up into a sick, deeply sinister smile. He raised his right hand and slowly pointed his index finger directly at me, mimicking a gun, and dropped his thumb. A cold chill ran down my spine. I knew right then, in my gut, that this war was far from over. But right now, I put the car in drive and left that toxic nightmare in my rearview mirror. Uncle David insisted we stay at his penthouse located right in the center of the bustling financial district. It was a massive, ultra-modern space with gorgeous floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire glittering city skyline. For the first time in my entire 25 years of existence, I experienced what a peaceful home actually felt like. There was no screaming. There was no walking on eggshells to avoid triggering someone's fragile ego. There was just quiet, mutual respect. That first night, Uncle David had the absolute best catering company in the city deliver a massive, perfectly cooked steak dinner right to the penthouse dining table. We opened an incredibly expensive bottle of red wine, and for 3 solid hours, Sarah, David, and I laughed, told stories, and actually celebrated my birthday. It was the best night of my life. But peace, especially when you are dealing with a deeply toxic family like mine, is always a temporary illusion. 3 days later, I was sitting at a corner table in my favorite local, independent coffee shop near the university campus. I had my headphones securely in my ears, drinking a strong black coffee, and intensely focusing on my laptop screen. Next to me, taking up half the wooden table, was my architectural thesis project. It was a highly detailed, meticulously handcrafted model of a modern, sustainable library. It represented 6 months of sleepless nights, thousands of dollars in acrylic and wood materials, and my entire golden ticket to securing a promotion at a top-tier firm after graduation. It was my absolute masterpiece. I had driven the Porsche to the coffee shop and parked it right by the large front glass window where I could keep an eye on it. The afternoon sun was shining brightly. Everything felt perfectly right in the world. I pulled out my smartphone to send a quick text to Sarah, and that was exactly when my blood ran freezing cold. I saw a small, persistent notification icon resting at the top of my screen. Find my friend's location shared. My heart immediately hammered violently against my ribs. Years ago, my controlling mother had forced everyone in the family to download a location-sharing app under the deceptive guise of family safety. In the absolute chaos of packing my bags and leaving the house that night, I had completely forgotten to dig into my settings and turn it off. I had been broadcasting my exact, pinpoint location to my toxic family for 3 straight days. I snapped my head up and looked out the massive glass window of the coffee shop. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Carter was walking aggressively across the parking lot. He was wearing a dark, oversized hoodie, his eyes scanning the parked cars like a hawk. He spotted the silver Porsche. He didn't look angry. He looked hyper-focused and incredibly malicious. I watched, paralyzed with dread for a split second, as Carter reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small piece of metal that glinted brightly in the sunlight. A car key. My stomach plummeted. The spare key. Uncle David had demanded and taken the primary key fob, but none of us had remembered the physical valet spare key that my dad always kept hidden in a junk drawer in the kitchen. Carter walked right up to the driver's side door, inserted the key, and unlocked it. He opened the door, but he didn't get in to steal it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy steel hammer. He leaned heavily into the car, his eyes locking directly onto the passenger seat where I had temporarily placed a secondary, smaller prototype of my library model while I was inside. He wasn't there to steal the expensive car. He was there to destroy my architectural work. He was there to smash my future to tiny, irreparable pieces. I shoved my wooden chair back so violently it crashed loudly to the coffee shop floor, startling several patrons. "Hey!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, sprinting toward the heavy glass front door. I burst out onto the pavement, the hot afternoon air hitting my face like a blast from a furnace. "Carter, Get the hell away from the car right now. Carter paused, his upper body still half-leaning inside the Porsche. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and that same sinister, sickening smile from the living room window was plastered across his face. He raised the heavy steel hammer high above his head. You think you can just take what's rightfully mine and walk away, Mason? Carter yelled across the crowded parking lot, not caring who heard him. You're nothing. You hear me? You're a pathetic loser, and I'm going to make sure everyone in this city knows it. He gripped the handle tightly, his knuckles turning white, and swung his arm back, preparing to smash the heavy hammer right down onto the delicate acrylic roof of my library model. Every muscle in my body tensed. I was too far away to physically tackle him in time. I watched my entire academic career flash before my eyes. Drop the hammer, Carter. Right now. The commanding voice didn't come from me. It came from directly behind Carter. Sarah had just pulled into the parking lot in her sedan. She had literally jumped out of the driver's seat before her car was even fully parked in the spot. She marched directly up to Carter, her heels clicking aggressively on the asphalt, her eyes blazing with absolute, unfiltered fury. Right behind her, Chloe, the barista from the coffee shop who knew me well and had run out after me, had stepped onto the sidewalk holding her smartphone up, the camera lens pointing squarely at Carter's face, recording every single second. Carter froze, his arm still suspended awkwardly in the air. He looked at Sarah, then at Chloe's glowing phone screen recording him. What you are doing right this exact second, Sarah said, her voice dropping into a cold, terrifyingly professional legal tone that she used in moot court, is attempted destruction of private property. That architectural model is valued at over $5,000 in labor and materials, making this a felony offense in this state. You used an unauthorized, stolen key to enter a vehicle that does not legally belong to you, which constitutes breaking and entering. Sarah took a bold step closer to him, completely and utterly unfazed by the heavy steel weapon in his hand. So, Carter, do you want to go to a real jail today? Because I have the police chief's direct line saved on speed dial, and I will gladly ruin your entire pathetic life right here in this parking lot while we film it. Carter's arrogant bravado shattered instantly. He wasn't used to people actually fighting back, let alone an assertive woman using cold, hard facts and the law to corner him. His hand shook noticeably as he slowly lowered the heavy hammer. He looked over at me, standing just a few feet away now, holding my own phone up and recording every second of his humiliating defeat. You're all crazy, Carter muttered defensively, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. This is family business. She shouldn't even be involved in this. I am his fiancée, Sarah snapped back instantly, stepping even closer so she was in his personal space. That makes me family. Now you are going to put the spare key on the roof of the car, take your little hammer, and walk away before I press send on this 911 call and have you arrested in broad daylight. Carter's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. A thick blue vein pulsed visibly on his temple. He knew he was completely beaten. With a frustrated grunt, he threw the spare key aggressively onto the roof of the Porsche, scratching the silver paint slightly. He gripped his hammer tightly, glared at me with eyes full of pure venom, and began walking backward away from the car. You think you won, Mason? Carter spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You have absolutely no idea what's coming. You have no idea what Dad and Mom are going to do to you for this. He turned sharply and practically jogged away, his shoulders hunched, disappearing quickly around the brick corner of the strip mall. I let out a massive, shaky breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped my phone onto the concrete. Sarah rushed over and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. Are you okay? Did he break anything? She asked frantically, quickly leaning over to inspect the model resting safely in the passenger seat. No, I whispered, my voice hoarse. It's safe. Thank you, Sarah. You saved it. I looked down at the valet key sitting innocuously on the scratched roof of the car. Carter's parting words echoed loudly in my head. You have no idea what Dad and Mom are going to do to you. Something wasn't right. Carter was arrogant and stupid, but he wasn't brave enough to pull a stunt like this in public unless my parents had gassed him up and given him the explicit green light to do so. They were planning something much bigger, and I desperately needed to figure out what it was before they struck again. I grabbed the spare key, locked the Porsche securely, and hugged Sarah one more time. We needed to get back to Uncle David's penthouse and prepare for whatever my parents were planning. The peace was officially over. The war had just begun. When Sarah and I finally got back to the secure penthouse, Uncle David was sitting at his large mahogany dining table, carefully reviewing stacks of legal documents. I quickly told him exactly what had just happened in the parking lot. I showed him the high-definition video of Carter holding the hammer, looking like a deranged criminal. Uncle David's face turned to absolute stone. "That's it," David said quietly, slamming his laptop shut. I gave them a chance to walk away quietly with their dignity intact. They chose war. I'm calling my lawyer right now to draft a restraining order. But while David walked out to the expansive balcony to make his calls, a nagging, persistent thought pulled at the back of my brain. Why were my parents so incredibly desperate for money? Yes, Uncle David had cut off the $6,000 a month, but my father still had a small accounting practice. It wasn't making millions, but it was enough to survive on. Unless they were hiding massive, crippling debts. I walked over to my duffel bag and pulled out my old, heavy college laptop. It was the computer I had used during my freshman year before upgrading, and it was still automatically logged into the family's shared cloud storage drive. My father, for all his horrible flaws, was an obsessive digital hoarder. He scanned and saved every single receipt, letter, and financial document. I opened the drive and started digging. I ignored the folders full of family vacation photos and the mundane electric bills. I searched the keyword bank. Nothing unusual popped up. Then, my mind drifted to the saddest day of my life. My grandmother's funeral 2 years ago. Right before she passed, Grandma had pulled me aside in her quiet hospital room. She told me she had set aside a small inheritance, a college fund specifically for me, to ensure I graduated architecture school and got a promotion without drowning in debt. It was supposed to be exactly $15,000. But a month after the funeral, my father told me the estate had been completely drained by unexpected medical bills, and there was absolutely nothing left. I had believed him. I had gone to the bank and taken out massive student loans to cover my final years of tuition. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My heart started beating faster. I typed the word inheritance into the search bar and hit enter. A single PDF file popped up instantly. It was dated exactly 3 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. I clicked on it. The air completely left my lungs. My heart stopped beating. It was a high-resolution scanned copy of a cashier's check. It was made out to Mason Robert for the exact sum of $15,000. The memo line clearly read, "Grandma's College Fund." I frantically scrolled down to the second page of the PDF to see the back of the check. There, on the endorsement line, was a signature, spelled my name, but the handwriting wasn't mine. The loop on the M was far too wide. The angle of the letters was completely wrong. It was my father's distinct handwriting, poorly disguised to look like mine. I sat there, staring blankly at the glowing screen. They didn't just favor Carter. My own father had forged my signature and stolen $15,000 of my inheritance. He had committed a federal crime. "Sarah?" I choked out, my voice sounding incredibly hollow, like it belonged to a ghost. "David, please come look at this." Sarah walked over quickly, read the screen, and gasped loudly. She covered her mouth with her hand in pure shock. "Oh my God, Mason, this is wire fraud. This is felony identity theft." David stood right behind me, his large hands gripping the back of my chair so hard his knuckles turned stark white. "They stole your college fund," David growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "They forged your name, cashed the check, and let you take out student loans while they probably spent every penny of that money on Carter's pathetic lifestyle." The last shred of empathy I had for my parents vanished into thin air in that exact second. It evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard, impenetrable wall of steel. They weren't my family anymore. They were common criminals. The very next morning, before we could even formulate a legal plan with the stolen check, my phone started vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. Notifications were pouring in by the second. Beeps, buzzes, flashes. I unlocked my phone and opened the Facebook app. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. My mother had posted a massive, multi-paragraph status update. She had deliberately tagged 50 family members, church friends, and neighbors to ensure maximum visibility. Accompanying the text was a highly staged photo of her and my father looking incredibly haggard, sitting at their kitchen table with tissues balled up in their hands, looking like tragic victims. The post read, "It breaks a loving mother's heart to share this, but I feel it is my duty to warn other parents about the reality of elder abuse. After giving our youngest son, Mason, everything, paying his rent, buying his clothes, loving him unconditionally, he has turned his back on us. 2 days ago, manipulated by a wealthy relative, Mason violently attacked his brother, stole our family's primary vehicle, and abandoned his sick parents. Now, he is attempting to extort us for money using baseless legal threats. Please pray for our family. Narcissistic abuse can hide behind a polite smile." I felt physically sick. I scrolled down to the comments section. Aunt Martha, my mother's older sister and a woman who constantly preached about family loyalty, had commented first. "I am so disgusted. I always knew there was something dark about Mason. You and Robert stay strong. Family is everything, and he has betrayed his own blood." Matthew, a guy I went to high school with, chimed in, "Bro, stealing your parents' car? That's low. Pay them back and apologize." There were dozens of comments. People I had known for years were tearing my character to shreds, publicly calling me a thief, a sociopath, a spoiled brat. My mother was successfully controlling the narrative, painting herself as the tragic victim while simultaneously destroying my professional and personal reputation. "I need to reply," I said, my fingers flying over the keyboard, ready to scream the truth into the comments section. I need to tell them about the forged check. I need to post the video of Carter. "Stop!" Sarah grabbed my wrist gently but firmly. "Mason, look at me. Do not engage. Do not comment. That is exactly what they want." Sarah looked me directly in the eyes. "If you comment, they will drag you into the mud. They want you to look unhinged and aggressive to prove their point." "She's right," Uncle David said, walking into the living room holding a fresh, steaming cup of coffee. His eyes were cold and incredibly calculating. "In a street fight, the guy who screams the loudest usually loses. The guy who stays quiet and throws the hardest punch wins. So what do we do?" I asked, feeling entirely helpless against the rising tide of public humiliation. "I can't just let them ruin my reputation. We build an ironclad fortress," Sarah said, pulling out her laptop and placing it firmly on the table. "We take screenshots of every single defamatory comment. We archive the video of Carter. We print the forged inheritance check. We document every penny Uncle David ever sent them. We don't argue on Facebook. We argue in front of a judge." For the next 8 solid hours, Uncle David's luxurious penthouse was transformed into a highly efficient legal war room. The massive dining table was quickly covered in printed bank statements, highlighted text messages, and complex legal statutes Sarah had pulled from her university's law library database. We documented absolutely everything. We traced the $6,000 monthly payments Uncle David had made to my father. David, being the meticulous businessman he was, had cleverly written personal loan repayment expected in the memo line of every single bank transfer for the last 3 years. It wasn't a gift. It was legally actionable debt totaling over $50,000. We compiled the devastating evidence of the wire fraud. We placed the scanned check with the forged signature right alongside 10 examples of my actual, verified signature from lease agreements and school forms. The discrepancy was glaring and undeniable. Any handwriting expert would spot the forgery in seconds. "This is devastating material," Sarah said, organizing the freshly printed papers into 3 neat, color-coded folders. "Mason, if we submit this to the authorities, your father could face federal prison time. Are you absolutely sure you want to involve a lawyer and go through with this? I thought about my mother blocking the stairs on my birthday. I thought about my father calling me selfish while catering to a grown man's tantrum. I thought about Carter raising a hammer over my life's work. And then, I thought about my grandmother trusting my parents to give me that college fund, only for them to steal it. I'm sure," I said without a single ounce of hesitation or regret. "They made their choices. Now they get the consequences." Uncle David nodded approvingly. He opened his email client on his laptop and began typing rapidly. "I'm sending your father one final ultimatum. A secret, private email. I'm giving them one last chance to surrender before I drop a nuclear bomb on their lives." He read the email aloud as he typed. "Robert, I have compiled irrefutable evidence of your financial crimes. I have documentation proving you owe me $50,000 in personal loans. More importantly, I have the scanned copy of Mason's $15,000 check bearing your forged signature. You have 24 hours to delete all posts and sign a payment plan. If you refuse, I will file a civil lawsuit, and I will hand the forgery evidence to the police." He hit send. The room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait and see if my parents were smart enough to back down, or arrogant enough to double down on their lies. We didn't have to wait long at all. At exactly 7 a.m. the very next morning, my phone vibrated loudly on the glass nightstand with an email forward from Uncle David. It was my father's highly anticipated response. I opened it, half expecting a desperate plea for mercy or a cowardly apology. Instead, what I read made the blood boil in my veins. "David," my father wrote, "I don't know what kind of fantasy world you and that ungrateful brat Mason are living in, but you don't scare me. The money you sent us was a gift between brothers. Good luck proving otherwise to a judge. As for the check, you have absolutely no proof of who signed it. We spent that money on household expenses that benefited Mason anyway. You are tearing this family apart over nothing. We will not delete our Facebook posts. We have a right to tell the truth about how Mason abused us. If you want a legal battle, bring it on. My lawyer says you have no case. See you in court." I stared at the glowing screen of the email, utterly bewildered by the sheer, terrifying magnitude of their delusion. They were completely cornered, holding a losing hand, and yet they were screaming at the top of their lungs that they had won the game. "They actually think they can beat us," I said, handing the phone over to Sarah so she could read the madness for herself. Uncle David let out a dark, booming laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the penthouse. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the chilling sound of an apex predator that had just cornered its prey. "Robert always was an arrogant, short-sighted fool. He thinks because he manipulated me when we were younger, he can do it forever." David pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and made a single phone call. "Elijah? It's David. File the civil suit immediately. Yes, for the full $50,000 plus legal fees. And take the forgery packet to the police precinct. I want a detective assigned to it by noon." He hung up the phone. The legal storm was officially unleashed. There was no going back now. But I had my own specific move to make. My parents were relying heavily on the court of public opinion to make me surrender. They thought the social pressure from Aunt Martha and the neighborhood gossips would force me to crawl back and apologize. I looked at Julian, my best friend from architecture school who had just arrived at the penthouse to bring us coffee and moral support. Julian was a tech wizard and successfully managed several large social media accounts. "Julian," I said, sliding my phone across the table to him. On the screen was the crystal-clear video of Carter attempting to smash my car with a hammer, screaming like a lunatic. "Can you post this video to all the local community groups?" I asked, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Tag Aunt Martha, Matthew, and everyone who commented calling me an abuser. Let them see exactly who the real victim is." "Consider it done," Julian grinned, his fingers already flying. The war had moved past closed doors. My parents had dug their own graves, and I was holding the shovel. When Julian hit post on that video, the internet didn't just react. It exploded. We sat in Uncle David's living room and watched the absolute destruction of my mother's carefully crafted victim narrative happen in real time. Julian had posted the high-definition video of Carter violently swinging a steel hammer at my car, screaming like an absolute maniac, directly into the local community Facebook groups. He tagged Aunt Martha. He tagged Matthew. He tagged every single person who had left a nasty comment on my mother's original post. The shift in public opinion was instantaneous and brutal. People who had been praying for my parents just an hour ago were now demanding answers. The comments came flooding in like a tidal wave. People were asking why a 29-year-old man was trying to smash a college student's architectural project. They were asking why my parents were defending a criminal act. Within 45 minutes, Aunt Martha completely deleted her comment. 10 minutes after that, Matthew sent me a private message apologizing, saying he didn't know the whole story and that Carter looked completely unhinged. By noon, my mother had panic-deleted her entire Facebook post and deactivated her account entirely. She couldn't handle the heat. The echo chamber she relied on for sympathy had completely collapsed around her. But public humiliation was just the appetizer. The main course was served at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Uncle David had paid extra for an expedited process server. We got the notification that my father had been officially served with the civil lawsuit for the $50,000. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was my father. I didn't answer. I just watched it ring, feeling a profound sense of control that I had never experienced in my entire life. They were completely cornered. They had no money to fight a massive legal battle against a millionaire real estate investor, and they knew the police were currently reviewing the forgery evidence. The absolute sheer panic must have been suffocating. The next morning, Uncle David's intercom buzzed. The concierge downstairs announced that Robert, Brenda, Carter, and a man identifying himself as their lawyer were in the lobby, begging for a meeting. "Send them up," Uncle David said, his voice cold and flat. I sat next to Sarah at the massive dining table. Sarah had her 3 color-coded legal folders laid out perfectly in front of her. Uncle David stood near the floor-to-ceiling window, his arms crossed, looking like a judge ready to hand down a life sentence. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. My family walked in, and they looked absolutely terrible. My father's face was gaunt and gray, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. My mother's eyes were swollen and red from crying. Carter trailed behind them, staring at the floor, completely stripped of his arrogant swagger. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Their lawyer, a tired-looking man named Elijah, stepped forward. He took one single look at Sarah, looked at the meticulously organized legal binders on the table, and I could physically see his professional confidence evaporate. Elijah knew he was walking into a slaughterhouse. "David Mason," my father started, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, we are family. This lawsuit is going to destroy us. We are going to lose the house. We want to settle this quietly." "Sit down, Robert," Uncle David commanded, pointing to the chairs opposite us. "You don't get to dictate how this goes. You are here to listen." My parents and Carter sat down slowly, like prisoners taking their seats at a parole hearing. Elijah opened his briefcase, but Sarah didn't even give him a chance to speak. She opened the first folder and slid a copy of the forged cashier's check across the smooth mahogany wood. "Let's skip the small talk," Sarah said, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "We are here to discuss the $50,000 in unpaid personal loans, the attempted felony destruction of private property by Carter, and the federal wire fraud committed by Robert regarding Mason's inheritance." Elijah looked down at the copy of the forged check. He blanched. He looked at my father with wide, panicked eyes. Clearly, my father had conveniently forgotten to mention the federal crime to his own legal counsel. "We can explain the check," my father stammered, sweat pouring down his temples. "Mason, son, you have to understand. Things were incredibly tight financially. We needed that $15,000 just to keep the lights on, to buy groceries. We used your college fund for the family. We intended to pay you back, I swear. I stared at him, my face an emotionless mask. You forged my signature to steal money my grandmother left specifically for my education, and you expect me to believe you spent it on groceries? It's the truth, my mother cried out, reaching a trembling hand across the table toward me. We made a terrible mistake, but we did it to survive. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I looked from my father to my mother and finally to Carter. What people? Uncle David asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet whisper. Who did Carter owe? My father realized his catastrophic mistake, but it was too late. The dam had broken. They forged my signature. They stole my college fund. They committed a federal felony. Not to survive, but to protect a gambling addict from the consequences of his own actions. And then they had the absolute audacity to watch me take out massive, high-interest student loans, watch me work double shifts until my hands bled, and call me selfish for wanting to celebrate my birthday. I looked at Carter. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor, a pathetic, broken shell of a man. I felt a profound, deep-seated disgust wash over me. It was a physical revulsion. Every single memory I had of my childhood, every time I was told to compromise, every time I was pushed aside for Carter, it all clicked into place. I wasn't a son to them. I was collateral damage. I was a resource to be drained to keep their favorite child afloat. You stole my future, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. You risked federal prison to save a man who tried to smash my car with a hammer 3 days ago. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably now. We love you, Mason. We love both our boys. We just didn't know what else to do. You could have let him face his own consequences, I replied coldly, standing up from my chair. But you didn't. And now you are going to face yours. Uncle David stepped forward, pulling a heavy, multi-page legal document from his inside jacket pocket. He threw it onto the table. It landed with a loud, final smack right in front of my father. Elijah, their lawyer, quickly grabbed it and started scanning the pages, his eyes widening with every paragraph he read. This is a legally binding settlement agreement, Uncle David announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority. And these are my non-negotiable terms. Option 1. You sign this document right now. You legally acknowledge the $50,000 debt, and you agree to a strict wage garnishment plan until every single penny, plus interest, is repaid to me. My father let out a weak whimper, but Uncle David completely ignored him. Secondly, David continued, pointing a hard finger at my mother, you have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. I am selling the house. You will find your own place to live with your own money. My mother let out a loud wail, burying her face in her hands. David, please, we have nowhere to go. The housing market is too expensive. I truly do not care, David said coldly. Thirdly, you will find a way to secure a personal bank loan, and you will repay Mason the $15,000 you stole from his inheritance fund within 60 days. And finally, all three of you will sign a strict, legally binding no-contact order. You will never call Mason. You will never text him. You will never approach him at his school or his workplace. If you violate this order, you will be arrested. The room was silent except for my mother's heavy sobbing. And option 2? Elijah asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Option 2, Sarah spoke up, her voice sharp and uncompromising. We walk away from this table. Uncle David proceeds with the civil trial, which you will lose, forcing you into total bankruptcy. Furthermore, I will personally drive to the district attorney's office and hand them the forgery evidence regarding the college fund check. Robert will face federal wire fraud charges, and I will press felony destruction of property charges against Carter for the incident with the hammer. Both of you will go to prison. Elijah leaned over and whispered frantically into my father's ear. I could see the lawyer aggressively shaking his head, pointing at the forged check. He was telling my father that he had absolutely no defense. He was completely trapped. My father looked up. His eyes were completely hollow. The arrogant, controlling man who had ordered me to my room like a child just a week ago was gone. In his place was a broken, terrified criminal. With a shaking, violently trembling hand, my father picked up the expensive silver pen Uncle David had placed on the document. He didn't read the pages. He just flipped to the back and signed his name. His signature was messy, erratic, nothing like the careful forgery he had placed on my grandmother's check. He slid the document to my mother. She signed it while crying so hard her tears literally stained the thick legal paper. Finally, Carter snatched the pen. He glared at me one last time, a pathetic attempt at maintaining his pride, before aggressively scribbling his name and throwing the pen across the table. 30 days, Robert, Uncle David said, picking up the signed document and handing it to Sarah. I will have the locks changed on the 31st day. Get out of my penthouse. My family stood up in complete silence. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't apologize. They turned around and walked toward the elevator. I stood perfectly still and watched the heavy steel elevator doors slide shut, cutting off the view of my mother's tear-stained face. The loud ding of the elevator descending echoed in the quiet room. It was over. I had cut the infection completely out of my life. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate aftermath of that meeting was like watching a massive, slow-motion train wreck from a very safe distance. Because Julian had posted the video of Carter's hammer attack, the local rumor mill was already churning at maximum speed. But when my parents suddenly started packing up their house and holding a massive, desperate yard sale to raise cash, the truth became impossible for them to hide. They couldn't control the narrative anymore. They had to confess to their church group and their neighbors that Uncle David owned the house and was forcing them out. The sheer public humiliation of losing their perfect life facade completely destroyed my father's fragile ego. He stopped leaving the house entirely during those final 30 days. Carter's reality check was the most satisfying to observe from afar. Without the shiny Porsche to drive around, and without my parents having the extra cash to fund his lifestyle, he was forced into the real world. A mutual friend texted me a picture 2 weeks later. It was Carter, wearing an ugly green polo shirt and a name tag, bagging groceries at a discount supermarket on the bad side of town. He looked completely miserable. The golden child, the man who thought he owned a real estate empire, was now asking people if they preferred paper or plastic. As for the rest of the family, the rats quickly tried to jump off the sinking ship. Aunt Martha, the woman who had publicly called me a sociopath on Facebook, suddenly found my phone number. She started leaving me long, rambling voicemails. Mason, sweetheart. Her voice oozed through my phone speaker one evening. I am so sorry about the misunderstanding online. Your mother lied to me. She told me terrible things. We are still family, Mason. I would love to take you and Sarah out for a nice dinner to catch up. I didn't call her back. I didn't text her. I simply blocked her number, blocked her on all social media platforms, and completely erased her from my existence. I did the exact same thing to Matthew and anyone else who had eagerly jumped on the hate bandwagon without asking for my side of the story. I learned a very harsh but incredibly valuable lesson during those few weeks. Toxic people rely entirely on your polite silence to get away with their abuse. The moment you establish an ironclad boundary and enforce real, severe consequences, they don't know how to handle it. They panic. They crumble. My parents moved out on the 29th day. They couldn't afford a house in our neighborhood. They ended up renting a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy complex out in the suburbs. My father's accounting business took a massive hit because his wages were immediately garnished by Uncle David's aggressive lawyers. Every single month, 25% of his income was legally stripped from his bank account to pay back the $50,000 he stole. They were financially ruined, socially isolated, and stuck in a tiny apartment with a 29-year-old grocery bagger who blamed them for everything. It was the exact life they had built for themselves through years of lies and manipulation. Karma hadn't just knocked on their door, it had kicked it off the hinges. And as for me, I was finally breathing clean air. For the first time in 25 years, my mind was entirely my own. There was no background anxiety humming in my brain. I didn't have to worry about walking on eggshells, or calculating my words to avoid setting off Carter's temper, or bracing myself for my mother's inevitable guilt trips. The absolute silence of their absence was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I threw my entire being into my final semester of architecture school. I practically lived in the university studio. With the toxic weight of my family lifted off my shoulders, my creativity exploded. The sustainable library model that Carter had tried to destroy became my absolute obsession. Sarah was my rock during this entire process. She would come to the studio late at night, bringing me black coffee and takeout food, sitting quietly in the corner studying for her bar exam while I meticulously glued tiny acrylic windows and laser-cut wooden beams. We were building our futures side by side, entirely independent of the generational trauma that had tried to drag us down. Uncle David became the father figure I never actually had. He didn't try to smother me or control my choices. He just offered quiet, solid support. He reviewed my financial plans, helped me set up a proper investment account, and treated me with the respect of an equal adult. He showed me that true family isn't about blood relations. Blood is just an accident of biology. True family is about loyalty, respect, and who stands beside you when you are backed into a corner. There were moments, usually late at night when the city was quiet, where a brief, fleeting shadow of grief would pass over me. I wasn't grieving the family I lost. I was grieving the family I never had. I grieved the fact that I never got to experience unconditional parental love. I grieved the realization that my father valued a gambling addict over his youngest son's future. But that grief never lasted long. It was always quickly replaced by a profound sense of empowerment. I had survived them. They had thrown their absolute worst at me. Lies, theft, public humiliation, attempted destruction, and I was still standing. In fact, I wasn't just standing. I was thriving. I realized that by cutting them off, I had broken a generational cycle of abuse and enabling. I was protecting my future. I was protecting Sarah. I was ensuring that if we ever had children of our own, they would never, ever know the kind of manipulative cruelty I grew up with. I funneled all that energy, all that clarity, into my final thesis presentation. I double-checked every calculation, perfected every digital rendering, and polished my public speaking skills until I was flawless. I was preparing for the final battle of my academic career, and I had never felt more ready in my entire life. The boy who cowered at the bottom of the stairs was dead. The man who replaced him was unstoppable. 3 months later, the morning sun poured through the massive skylights of the university's main architectural exhibition hall. It was the day of my final thesis defense. I stood beside my presentation board, wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. I felt incredibly calm. My hands weren't shaking. My heart was beating at a steady, confident rhythm. Directly in front of me sat the thesis committee, a panel of 3 highly respected architects, including Professor Miller, a man notoriously known for completely destroying students' projects during these final reviews. Behind the committee, sitting in the public observation row, were Sarah, Uncle David, and Julian. They were beaming with pride. "Mr. Robert," Professor Miller started, adjusting his thick glasses and leaning forward, his eyes scanning my complex library model. "Your integration of sustainable water reclamation is ambitious. However, looking at your load-bearing calculations on the south-facing green roof, I question the structural integrity during heavy rainfall. Explain your methodology." This was it, the trap question designed to make students panic. 3 months ago, I might have stuttered. I might have doubted myself. But today, I simply smiled. "I anticipated that concern, Professor," I said smoothly, stepping forward with a laser pointer. I guided the red dot to the specific structural joints on the model. If you refer to page 42 of my supplementary technical packet, you will see I utilized a reinforced modular cross-bracing system specifically adapted from seismic design principles. It not only handles the maximum projected water weight, but actually distributes the load dynamically, increasing the overall stability of the southern facade by 15% beyond standard building code requirements. I didn't stop there. I walked them through every single detail. I defended every design choice, every material selection, and every environmental impact study. I spoke with the absolute conviction of a man who knew his own worth. I didn't just survive the defense. I dominated it. When I finished my closing statement, the hall was perfectly silent for a few seconds. Professor Miller looked at his two colleagues. They both nodded slightly. Miller looked back at me, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his stern face. Mason, in my 20 years of teaching at this university, this is one of the most comprehensive, innovative, and flawlessly executed thesis projects I have ever reviewed. The committee unanimously approves your project with the highest possible distinction. The relief and pure joy that washed over me were indescribable. Sarah let out a loud, echoing cheer from the back row, completely ignoring the formal setting. Julian clapped loudly, and Uncle David stood up, nodding his head in deep respect. I had done it. Despite the chaos, despite the betrayal, despite the stolen college fund, I had secured my degree at the absolute top of my class. I walked out of that exhibition hall feeling 10 feet tall. The heavy chains of my past had finally permanently shattered. As we walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight on campus, Uncle David pulled me aside near the courtyard fountain. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope. "This arrived at my office yesterday via certified mail," Uncle David said quietly, handing the envelope to me. I looked at the return address in the corner. It was a cheap apartment complex located in the industrial part of the city. The handwriting belonged to my father. I opened the envelope. Inside were two pieces of paper. The first was a cashier's check made out directly to Uncle David for a few $1,000s. The first garnished payment of the massive $50,000 debt they owed him. The second was a separate cashier's check made out directly to me. It was for exactly $15,000. I stared at the numbers printed on the official bank paper. It was my college fund. It was the inheritance my grandmother had left me, the money my father had criminally stolen to pay off a bookie, now returned to me by force of law. His lawyer informed me they had to liquidate my brother's entire retirement account and sell almost all of Brenda's expensive jewelry to secure that money to avoid the wire fraud charges. Uncle David explained, his voice entirely devoid of pity. "They are completely broke, Mason. They are living paycheck to paycheck in a basement unit, and Robert is working overtime just to cover the garnishment." I held the check in my hand. A few months ago, the thought of my parents struggling, selling their possessions, and living in poverty would have crushed me with unbearable, suffocating guilt. I closed my eyes and searched my heart for that guilt. I looked for the pity. That evening, Uncle David took all of us, Sarah, Julian, and myself, to Magnolia's. It was the exact same high-end, exclusive downtown steakhouse where my 25th birthday dinner was supposed to have happened 3 months ago. We sat at a beautiful corner table with a perfect view of the city harbor. The atmosphere was electric. The food was incredible. We toasted with expensive champagne to my successful thesis defense, to Sarah's upcoming law school graduation, and to a future that was completely ours to build. Halfway through the main course, my phone buzzed in my suit pocket. I pulled it out, fully intending to turn it on silent, but the preview of the email on my lock screen caught my eye. It was from the senior hiring partner at Harrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious, top-tier architectural firms in the entire state. They had attended the public thesis exhibition earlier that morning. I opened the email. My eyes scanned the professional text rapidly. "Dear Mr. Robert," the email read, "our senior partners were profoundly impressed by your sustainable library thesis presentation today. We have been searching for innovative talent to join our urban development team. We would like to formally offer you a position as a junior architect, effective immediately upon your graduation. This role includes a full salary, comprehensive benefits, and a direct track for future promotion. Please review the attached contract. I stopped breathing. A junior architect role straight out of school at Harrison and Associates wasn't just a job. It was a massive, life-changing promotion from my current intern status. It was the golden ticket I had worked so desperately for. Mason, Sarah asked softly, noticing the shocked expression frozen on my face. What is it? I couldn't speak. I just handed the phone across the table to her. Sarah read the email, her eyes widening in disbelief. She slapped her hand over her mouth, letting out a loud, joyous laugh that made a few nearby tables turn to look at us. Oh my God! David, Julian, look at this. Harrison and Associates just offered him a job. The table erupted. Julian high-fived me so hard my hand stung. Uncle David raised his crystal champagne flute high in the air, his eyes shining with profound pride. To Mason, Uncle David toasted, his deep voice carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant. A brilliant architect, a resilient man, and the true master of his own destiny. Cheers! Cheers! We all echoed, our glasses clinking together in a perfect, harmonious sound. I took a sip of the cold champagne and looked around the table at the people who genuinely loved me. This was my real family. I had lost the toxic blood relatives who only wanted to drain my light, but I had gained a fiercely loyal tribe who wanted nothing more than to see me shine. The nightmare was officially over. The best years of my life were just beginning. Later that night, long after the dinner was over and Sarah had gone to sleep, I stood alone on the expansive balcony of Uncle David's penthouse. The city lights of the financial district sparkled below me like millions of tiny diamonds scattered across the dark pavement. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. I leaned against the glass railing and looked out at the horizon, allowing myself a moment of deep, quiet reflection. If you had told me a year ago that my life would look like this, I would have thought you were insane. A year ago, I was a quiet, anxious kid, terrified of upsetting the delicate, toxic balance of my family. I was willing to sacrifice my own happiness, my own milestones, and my own mental health just to keep the peace. I thought being a good son meant enduring the abuse in silence. But looking back now, I realized that the terrible night they canceled my 25th birthday was actually the greatest gift they could have ever given me. By pushing me too far, by blatantly prioritizing a spoiled, destructive adult over my basic human dignity, they finally broke the illusion. They forced me to open my eyes and see them for who they truly were. Selfish, manipulative people who viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The pain of that realization was agonizing, yes. Discovering the forged check, realizing they stole my inheritance, facing the public smear campaign, it was a brutal trial by fire. But fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies. It burns away the dead wood and leaves behind only what is solid and real. I lost my parents and my brother, but I found my own spine. I found my self-worth. I learned that sometimes the absolute bravest, most powerful thing you can do in your life is to stop trying to fix toxic people, turn your back, and simply walk away. You do not owe your life to people who actively try to destroy it, regardless of whether or not you share the same DNA. Tomorrow, I will sign the contract for my new job. In a few months, I will marry Sarah. We will buy a house using the money I forced my father to return. We will build a life filled with honesty, hard work, and mutual respect. And my parents, trapped in the miserable consequences of their own choices, will never be allowed to cast a shadow over my happiness again. I took one last, deep breath of the cool city air, feeling lighter and freer than I ever thought possible. I turned away from the edge of the balcony, walked back inside the warm penthouse, and closed the heavy glass door securely behind me. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It was a painful journey, but sometimes the hardest endings are the only way to reach beautiful new beginnings. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever felt trapped by the expectations of the people who are supposed to love you. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, Dealing with toxic family dynamics? If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you are officially part of the 1% Club. Please leave a comment with the letter W for winner below. It's our secret sign to recognize the amazing people who stay until the very last word. Your support means the world to me. Please hit that like button, follow the channel, and I'll see you in the next story.